Hey, everybody. So before I start, full transparency, this might be tough for me to get through. My voice just cracked, if that wasn't foreshadowing what's going to happen. On multiple levels, I woke up this morning with the beginnings of a cold, and I hate it. Just trying to get the microphone infected for the next time David uses it. But truth be told, I did several months back, whenever they asked me to start a life group, particularly Adam, and then David was also in those conversations. They told me we were getting ready to go through Acts, and this particular subject popped immediately into my mind, and this is part of the reason why it's going to be tricky for me to get through, is because this particular message, preaching is a weird thing. You like it, and all at the same time, it's incredibly intimidating for people who do it, because it's something you got to do out of passion, but all at the same time, it's something that just sort of falls into your lap. And whenever you get messages, it's not like you're just intently looking for something to write about, like, this has got to be it. It's just like, it's really, honestly, half the time, it's you're reading something, and then it comes to you by the grace of God. So this particular thing came to me 7 years ago. I was a freshman in my college dorm room sitting alone, and all of a sudden I just felt this pop out at me. Problem was, it was only one line, and you can't do a sermon with one line. So over the next 7 years, it began slowly formulating in me. So this has been weighing on me for a long time. On top of that, it's also going to be tricky for me to get through. Partially, I think it's really important for anybody who's in a leadership position to be as transparent as possible. They've asked me to do a class, this church licensed me, so full transparency, I'm really bad at what I'm getting ready to preach about. So that might have something to do with why it's been weighing on me for a really long time. So if I say anything that seems really heavy, don't get me wrong, I'm not one of these people who just likes making people in congregations feel bad. That's not what I'm about. I'm preaching to the choir the whole time I'm talking this morning, so I'm right there with you. So, we'll get through it. It'll be good. So we've been going through the book of Acts, and right now we're in chapter 10, and I'm literally just starting at 10 verse 1. So if you want to stick your thumb in there real quick, or bookmark or something. So just as kind of a recap, we went over the first few chapters of Acts, and then we had a detour for a few weeks, very understandably, because of the two different natural disasters that hit the city. You know, it was very, very strange. I've lived here basically my whole life, never seen anything like that, where it's like, oh, a flood kind of creeps in, then everybody forgets about it because we get hit by a tornado, which there's this rumor can't happen here because of the hills and the river or something. I very, very quickly had people tell me, that's not true, because we live in Branson and we get them all the time, and we have more hills and more water. And we all learned that lesson too. And then we were so distracted by the tornado, everybody forgot that the flood was still there, and it kept getting worse and worse. And then the moment it starts receding, and now it's hanging on, and part of downtown is covered again. And it's just an extreme nuisance for our city right now. And I really feel like it was just a good and right thing for Adam and David and the rest of the leadership of the church to say, we're going to highlight this for a bit, because we would just be horrible ambassadors for Christ if we didn't have compassion for this for an extended time. And now we're back in Acts, and we very quickly went over chapters 8 and 9. And chapters 8, 9, and now 10 are really weird in the book of Acts, because they don't look like all the other books, right? So in the first few chapters of Acts, we have Jesus giving the Great Commission and then ascending, and then the disciples are just stuck, not knowing what to do. And they're just told, stay here and pray, and then Jesus is gone. That's not a whole lot to go on, right? So then they just pray, and for a really long period of time, until Pentecost comes along, and then we get what the Bible just calls tongues of fire, because that's a helpful description. And all of a sudden they're preaching in different languages, like a lot of different languages, because here in America, we got lots of room, like here, especially in Missouri, there's lots of room between one border and the other. We're not used to having to speak both French and Spanish because we don't need to. Right? But if you go to the Middle East, or if you go to parts of Europe, it's very common for people to be like bilingual, trilingual. They can speak 4 or 5 languages because you're commonly crossing borders. So these guys are all of a sudden speaking multiple different languages that all of these different people from different countries can understand. And they didn't know those languages this morning. And it's this incredible sign. And all of these people just keep getting saved, thousands upon thousands of them every single day, right? And they have this really weird lifestyle. Like they're giving up everything they own, they're selling it all, and then they're just giving it to Peter and the rest of the disciples, and they're living this very just like social commune style of life in and around the synagogues and this and that. And now, there's a really weird subculture of people. Sorry, Sydney, but I went to Bible college too, so I can say this, that go to Bible college. And we have our own little subset of like celebrity people that some of you might have heard of, and then others of you have no idea who they are, but Bible college people know who they are, right? And so whenever I was at the end of high school getting ready to go into college, so one of these names you people are going to know because we went through one of his books, Francis Chan, and then the other one you might not know, this guy named Shane Claiborne, who wrote this book. I cannot remember what it's called, but it's like the something revolution. I think it's like the radical revolution or something like that. But he has a really weird ministry in that he's genuinely called to have nothing. And he literally just does life with homeless people and takes care of them, presents the gospel to them, helps them out, and literally just day in, day out, God provides for his every need, whether it's someplace to stay, whether it's food, this, that. He just totally relies on God. It's a very nomadic existence where he's constantly working with homeless people. So whenever these two guys just kind of swept up on the scene, it was really popular for people around my age or a little bit older on Bible campuses to just look at the first couple chapters of Acts, even though I don't think that's what Francis Chan and Shane Claiborne meant whenever they were highlighting these chapters, but just saying, man, if we could live like that, if we could just do that in the first few chapters of Acts, then we'll fix all of the problems in the church. You know, like if we just stop caring about our stuff so much, and if we just start doing this and start doing that. And for a culture where like spring cleaning is a regular thing, and once a year we all decide to get around and look at all the stuff we don't touch anymore and stick it out on the curb. And then there's like the subculture of people that go and rummage through all of our stuff on the curb and take it. Like that speaks to us to say, man, I got a lot of stuff. I shouldn't have all this stuff. Maybe if I got rid of it and do this and do that, then we'll fix the stuff in the church and we'll be good, right? Except there's two main problems. The first one is I really don't think that's quite what Francis Chan and Shane Claiborne meant whenever they were highlighting those early chapters of Acts. And then all at the same time, you get into the whole other rabbit trail that I'm not going to go down today. You can pester David about it, about the difference between something that's prescriptive or descriptive. And the problem is Acts is a descriptive history book, not necessarily a here's what you should do theological book like Paul writes later. And here's a third thing that most people don't seem to realize. The first few chapters of Acts are great. They're awesome. They're amazing. You want to know why? I can say that because the Spirit says so. He does great, miraculous, wonderful things, and thousands of people are getting saved. But here's the other thing most people don't seem to catch on to. Those early chapters of Acts, the church, is still incomplete. And people think that's weird to say. You're like, you can't say something's wrong whenever thousands of people are getting saved. That's a good thing, right? No, there's still something missing here. And chapter 10 is where God points out what's missing. So in the very first verse, it says this: at Caesarea, there was a man named Cornelius, a centurion of what was known as the Italian cohort, a devout man who feared God with all his household, gave alms generously to the people, and prayed continually to God. At about the 9th hour of the day, he saw clearly in a vision an angel of God come in and say to him, Cornelius. And he stared at him in terror and said, "What is it, Lord?" And he said to him, "Your prayers and your alms have ascended as a memorial before God. And now send men to Joppa and bring back one who is known as Simon or Peter. He is lodging with the one who's known as Simon the tanner, whose house is by the sea." And when the angel who spoke to him had departed, he called 2 of his servants and a devout soldier from among his attendants and related everything to them and sent them to Joppa. Okay. So this is a weird way to start a chapter, particularly for a Jewish book, right? Chapters 8, 9, and 10 in Acts are super weird because they start highlighting characters that typically don't get highlighted in Jewish books, right? You have a character of a eunuch, which is somebody who's not even allowed to participate in the practices of Judaism for whatever reason, has a Judaistic text, and he just happens to be near one of the early church founders. Happens to be, you know what I'm saying. God made it happen. All of a sudden, he's saved, and then, poof, disciples gone, and eunuch's just left alone in the water, like going, I guess I know the truth of who God is now. And then the next chapter after that, you have a guy who's commissioned by the Sanhedrin to have the authority to persecute Christians, or whatever they would have called them at that time, because the name Christian hadn't stuck just yet. Just saying these guys are a nuisance, go out and kill them. So now Saul is walking around as a radical, zealous Pharisee who knows everything there is to know about the Old Testament, and just walking around saying, all right, you, and you all go to jail, you all are going to get executed in public, and I'll just hold people's coats while we make it happen. And then all of a sudden, Jesus just comes to him directly, and now he has a salvific experience. Both of these are weird stories. These are not common Jewish stories. And if you go back and look at other ancient Jewish history books, these are weird stories. These aren't the kind of stuff Jewish historians usually catalog, right? And now we get to chapter 10, and now we have a centurion, a Roman. This is not a good character to focus on. This guy is the epitome of everything Jews right now would hate. He is not only representative of the empire that oppresses them, he literally kills people for the empire that oppress him, and then on top of that, he has a weird fascination with their God. And Adam actually did a really good job setting up the kind of person that Cornelius is, because all throughout the Bible you see these weird people who aren't a part of the Jews and yet seem to already have some sort of either fascination with or quasi-relationship with Yahweh, and they don't know what it is, but they kind of keep slowly pursuing it. And Cornelius is one of these people, and they called them a handful of different things. One of them was God-fearers, because they didn't know how to describe them, and they weren't Jews. I mean, you could be grafted into Judaism, but it was a long, arduous process, and sometimes they didn't want to do the dietary practices, sometimes they didn't want to do this, sometimes they didn't want to do that. And let's be for real here, a lot of them didn't want to do it because they were full-grown men, and once they got to the part where you have to be circumcised, they said, I'm out, right? Because they don't want a rabbi just coming at them with that thing. So they just kind of do Judaism from a distance. But all of a sudden, Cornelius has an experience that's very much like a lot of other very important figures in the Bible. He has an experience with what Scripture calls an angel of the Lord. And the Old Testament is really weird about this, is this description God himself? Is it Christ? Is it just an angel? There's this ambiguous thing about what exactly it means for the angel of the Lord to be the angel of the Lord. But either way, only a handful of other figures in biblical history say the angel of the Lord came and talked to them, like Moses, like Mary, like Joseph. Angel of the Lord, poof, there, and starts talking to them about this stuff. So he begins to have an experience, a genuine, verifiable religious experience with Yahweh, and Yahweh says, go over there and find Peter. So now, at verse 9, it says, the next day, as they were on their journey and they were approaching the city of Joppa, Peter went up to the top of the household about the 6th hour of the day to pray, so around noon. And he became hungry and wanted something to eat. But while they were preparing a meal for him, he fell into a trance and saw the heavens opened up and something like a great sheet descending, being let down by its four corners upon the earth. And in it were all kinds of animals and reptiles and birds of the air. And there came a voice to him saying, rise, Peter, kill and eat. Peter said, by no means, Lord, for I have never eaten anything that is common or unclean. And the voice came again to him a second time, what God has made clean, do not call common or unclean. And this happened 3 times, and the thing was taken back up into heaven. And now while Peter was inwardly perplexed by what the vision he had just seen could mean, behold, the men who were sent by Cornelius, having made inquiry of Simon's house, stood at the gate and called out whether Simon Peter was there. And so Peter this is a weird vision, man. This is a really weird vision. So for us in America, 21st century America, and particularly for people who've been in church, we get the hindsight of people telling us what this vision is about, or we also get the hindsight of like reading, a paragraph later what the vision is about. Right? So you just feel hungry one day, right? And the sheet comes out of the sky, and if you're a Jew, you're not allowed to eat X, Y, and Z, and just God shows you this sheet, and it's got like spiders and beetles and monitor lizards and like a camel or like a rabbit, and I'm sure a pig is wandering around out there somewhere. It's stuff that he can't eat, and God just says, I want you to eat this, right? And for us, that still doesn't connect. So for the weirdness of this vision, say you're hungry one day, because I'm assuming everybody in the room has been distracted while they were praying at one point, maybe because you were hungry. And all of a sudden, God just has a silver platter come down from the sky because you're in a trance, and on it there is like baby seal kebab, and God's just like, eat up. And you're just like, no, that's not cool, man, right? That's probably how Peter feels right now, and he's just like, I don't get this, right? And this is a big problem for Peter, because they do what Jesus did. Jesus goes to the synagogues, he preaches, there's a profound experience. That's what the disciples have been doing. They go into the synagogue, they preach, and thousands of people are getting saved, right? Here's the problem. If Peter eats this stuff, he'll be ceremonially unclean. He can't go into the synagogue. He can't preach. People can't be saved. There's a problem here, God. I can't do what you're asking me to do. It's a problem. And so there's this back and forth of like, I can't eat that. Don't call it unclean. I can't eat that. Don't call it unclean. And all of a sudden, random people outside are just saying, hey, Peter, are you home? And he's just like, I don't know what to do with this. But it then says the Spirit tells him, go with these people because God has ordained them to come for you. And he goes with them, and it says without hesitation, he gets up and goes with them. All right, so it's like a 2-day or so journey from Joppa to get to Cornelius' home. So for 2 days, Peter's got the chance to mull this thing over because it's just weird. And now he's just on the road with 3 total strangers going to the house of somebody he doesn't know, but Cornelius is a very Roman name, so he knows the kind of place he's headed to, but he doesn't know what's in store for him. And let me see here. I lost my spot. I apologize. Starting in at verse 23, it says, so he invited them in to be guests, and the next day he rose, and they went away. And some of the brothers from Joppa accompanied him. And the following day they entered Caesarea. Cornelius was expecting him and had called together his relatives and close friends. When Peter entered, Cornelius met him and fell down at his feet and worshipped. But Peter lifted him up, saying, stand up. I too am a man. And as he talked with them, he went in and found that many persons had gathered. And when he said to them, you yourselves know how unlawful it is for a Jew to associate with or to visit anyone from another nation. But God has shown me that I should not call any person common or unclean. So when I was sent for, I came without objection. And I asked then, why have you sent for me? And Cornelius said, 4 days ago, about this hour, I was praying in my house. And at the 9th hour, behold, a man stood before me in bright clothing and said, Cornelius, your prayer has been heard, your alms have been remembered before God. Send therefore to Joppa and ask for Simon, who's called Peter, and he is lodging at the house of Simon the tanner by the sea. So I sent, and you have been kind enough to come. Now therefore, we are all here in the presence of God to hear all that you have been commanded by the Lord. And now we're in an even stranger situation, because not only has God said, hey, eat this stuff you're not allowed to eat, he's also saying, I'm calling you into a place you're not allowed to go. To do something that looks, feels, seems unnatural, counterintuitive. And whenever Peter gets there, he finally realizes what he's about ready to say here in the following verses. He says, so Peter opened his mouth and said, truly, I understand that God shows no partiality, but in every nation, anyone who fears him and does what is right and acceptable is acceptable to him. And so Peter begins to go on and present the gospel in Cornelius and his entire household, which it says his entire household. That means all of these friends and family and relatives, like all of these people who've gathered around to hear whatever the heck Cornelius has sent off for this random Jewish guy for, have gathered around to get a load of whatever's going on. Because that would be weird for the leader of a centurion, so the leader of a legion, to sit there and say, hey, go fetch me a Jewish guy. And about a week later, he finally shows up, and everybody's gathered around to see what's up. And it dawns on Peter that this vision of going and eating something he's not allowed to eat, going and doing something he's originally thought to not to be able to partake of, is not about food. It's about people. Because in the early church, there was this very understanding, and there's no reason to blame them. They're all Jews, and a Jewish Messiah comes to them and says, let me fully reveal to you who God is. And then the first thing he tells them is go to Judea and Samaria, which they were doing, and preach my message, right? And so they're Jews. Jesus was a Jew. All these other people are Jews, and they have a connection to our religion. We're going to preach to them. And so they do what's natural, and it's a good thing. It's a very good thing. The Spirit blesses it. He's being an active part of it. The tongues of fire thing, thousands of people being saved kind of a thing. Miraculous works are happening. They're healing people by just pulling a guy off the ground, and all of a sudden he's hopping and dancing around and doing stuff he hadn't been doing for a while. All of these things are good. They're very good, and there's a reason why we should look at that and say, that's great, and we should try to strive for something like that. But now all of a sudden in chapter 10, God steps in again and says, but we're still incomplete. Your good things are happening, but there's still one thing you're not doing, because Jesus' command was go to Judea and Samaria, which they did not necessarily because they felt like going to Judea and Samaria. They did it because they were being persecuted, so they had to spread out, right? And now all of a sudden they're still not following the rest of the command, which was go to the ends of the earth, baptizing people in the name of the Father and Son and the Holy Spirit. And now all of a sudden it dawns on Peter that God has made himself, through the person of Jesus Christ, available to all people, not just Jews, like they genuinely would have thought. And there's that thought keeps plaguing the church later on. Paul has to write about it in Galatians. But this is just a massive revelation to Peter. And it's a massive revelation to the rest of the disciples, because they have to have a meeting about, can this really happen? And Peter's like, well, it happened whether you like it or not. And I think it's a strange thing that Acts 10, or us approaching the subject of Acts 10, has come up where it has in our lifespan here as a church, right? Because that challenges us on a personal level of saying, oh, there needs to be this outward trajectory here, but it also challenges us as a corporate body, because we have just come through a time, at least the half-dozenth time, where the church has had to come together and circle the wagons because something happens. Something big happens that shakes us up, and we've got to really just get stuff together. And it was really, I was little for some of those other transition times, but I kind of remember them. And truth be told, I really feel everybody came together much more cohesively in this last time of transition. And really just opted to take the bull by the horns. But as is normal in those situations, we have to come together, really focus on what's happening here, be very discerning with whatever it might be the Spirit would have to say. But then it's very easy for us to get distracted doing what's only natural for us to do as a church. And in some ways, which is literally, I'm just piggybacking off of what Cindy was saying earlier, which is very fortuitous that her thing comes before mine. It's very easy for us to stay in this little spot, much like the early church, Because good things are happening in this spot. There's nothing wrong with being here in like Judea and Samaria. There's nothing wrong with having our spot here in Jefferson City, Missouri, and playing our part. But all at the same time, there's still a whole other aspect that if we're not careful, that if we're not discerning, if we're not real sensitive to whatever it is the Spirit's got going on, we can really easily miss it, which is this whole outward trajectory that Jesus kept talking about all of the time, saying, you're going to be this small group, you're going to be like a mustard seed, and you're going to take over a garden. And that's really weird for us to know. If you're a Jew, there's lots of, if you go to like the grocery store, you can get books that tell you how to plant stuff, right? And for a Jew, if you had like instructions on how to plant stuff, you got like half a page for this plant, a full page for this plant. If you were to look up instructions for mustard seed, they have lots of instructions about mustard because it's a little teeny tiny plant. And if you plant it the wrong way and you don't take care of it right, and you don't prune and do all this stuff right, you will have soon a garden of nothing but mustard bushes. Right? So whenever Jesus says my kingdom is like a mustard seed, he's talking about literally an unstoppable growing force that whether you like it or not, you now have to deal with it. And that's what he had envisioned, and yet the disciples are totally distracted by awesome, amazing things happening. It's very easy to get distracted by 3,000 people needing to be baptized on the spot. That'll keep you busy for a while, right? But God, even looking at something that amazing, that wonderful, that powerful, that moving, still says we're still not quite there yet. We need to push you more and more and more and more. And now finally the leader of one of the biggest leaders of his current church is now suddenly doing something he never thought he'd be doing in a place that he never thought he'd be doing it, to a person he never thought he'd be doing it to, out in this obscure, just this place of obscurity, and God says, here's where you're supposed to be too. And that's weird for us. It's weird because everything about it is weird. That's not our first thought. That's not the place where we want to be. That's not the place where we're comfortable. And yet God spent literally a week getting Peter into that place, and then he moves. And it's interesting because, and I want everybody to know, like, why I said at the beginning, this isn't a persecutorial thing, and I don't think God was being persecutorial toward Peter whenever he said, go, kill, and eat. And I don't think Peter was just, doing his normal stubborn Peter thing, being like, I'm not eating that because I'm a good Jew. No, I think it's just confusing. Remember? Baby seal on a platter. I wouldn't get it. And all of this is calling him into something he couldn't even imagine. And it's just very easy for us in a time of great need, in a time where we are supposed to focus, we're called to focus on what's going on, and then good things start happening, because good things are happening. I feel like good things are happening lately, and everybody I talk to seems to think a lot of great stuff is happening right now for us. But because of that, it's easy, because we're focusing so much on one calling, which is really important, okay? Here's the thing. God values a healthy church. God values a church with well thought out and intuitive programs that meet the needs of the people around it. God values volunteers who do like 800 things and need more breaks, but we can't give you more breaks because there's not quite enough volunteers to give you more breaks. And like, God values all the stuff we're doing. But because we're working on valuable things, it's easy to forget the outward trajectory God always had in mind. Because we're busy doing good stuff. But God is always calling us into more, into obscurity, something we don't understand. And I'm just a very pragmatic person. Like literally, that's the one thing I tell Katie. Like, if you want something, basically just give me no good reason to say no, and we'll do it. And now she does that. If she wants to do something that makes me uncomfortable because it costs a lot of money, she just goes, here, A, B, C, and D, what you gonna do with that? And I'm like, I guess I gotta say yeah. So we look at this stuff, we look at like well, we still can't even pull off this, and this quite right. We're still trying to figure it out, and we still need more volunteers for this and that, and it's just weird. It's awkward, and we don't know what to do with it. Yeah, kind of like 12 disciples who suddenly have like 5,000 disciples they got to take care of, and now God also tells Peter, hey, you also need to go into the rest of Europe and Asia Minor and everywhere else in the Mediterranean. You're supposed to do that too. And the whole point is, God calls that area, that place of obscurity, God says, that is clean. That's good. That's not common. It's good for us to be people that values what God values in a church. We also have to be a people that values everything God values, which is everybody else outside in that place of obscurity that we don't know what to do with, that feels weird, uncommon, uncomfortable, unclean. But God says, that's clean. Now I need you to get after it. And here's the thing, I'm not saying this from a point of view of, I've got answers. I'm going to give you a 5-point thing that we can do to suddenly break out into all the rest of Jefferson City and Cole County and then Missouri or whatever. I don't have the magical mustard seed instructions to do that. And I'm not going to pretend like I do. But I know that if we can come together in the same way we did just a couple months ago and be just as intent and just as discerning and just as careful and diligent, then God will do it. And we can do it. And the main reason why that's really hard for me is because I've gotten busy in the last few years. More busy than normal. And then there are times where I'm not busy, but more busy than I thought I would be. And it just, when you're busy writing something out like this, it's hard to not think back on all the people that just pass you by in life. And these are obvious, and you sit there in hindsight going, that's obvious what God wanted from me. You didn't do it intentionally, you didn't do it purposefully. There's nothing vicious in your heart that's just like, nah, I don't like you. You can be separated from Jesus for eternity. It just sort of happens. For whatever reason. You're busy, you're distracted, you're doing good things over here, you're making a vibrant, explosive church over here, or sometimes you're just tired and you need to lay down, or something happens and perfectly good, valuable people pass you by. And so, whenever we have God saying, this is clean, this is good, don't call it uncommon, don't call it something to avoid, I'm calling you to that, we then just got to sit here and just ask ourselves on an individual level, on a corporate level, and even just as a church, as a composite whole on a broader level, what are we going to do with that? Like I said, I don't have the answers. I'm 25. I don't got a whole lot of answers about much. I didn't have answers for you about what we were going to do whenever we had a music minister leave, and then a senior pastor leave, and then the youth pastor leave, and then the kids ministers leave. Like 10 years ago, I didn't have answers whenever we had 2 youth pastors who had to go in a very short period of time. I didn't have answers whenever, Mark had to go. I'm not saying I got answers, but I'm saying we can come together. Amen. And we can work it out. And to kind of illustrate what I want us to avoid, I'm going to tell you about, because you haven't learned about enough interesting people today, I'm going to tell you about who I think is genuinely one of the most amazing human beings to ever exist in the planet. I'm sure some of you know who he is, and some of you might not, because I don't know, our culture isn't really good about history anymore. His name is Oskar Schindler. Oskar Schindler's not a good man. He is a liar. He's a thief. He's a cheater, both financially and with his spouse. He was a notorious womanizer. I don't get it. He was not that pretty of a man, but somehow they liked him. Here's the other thing that most people don't seem to know about him, and I'm just going to do this real quick because this is distracting for me. He was a part of the Nazi Party in World War II. And some of y'all might be really concerned why I think an actual Nazi is one of the greatest human beings to ever exist. Let me tell you why. Oskar Schindler was not a Nazi because he actually believed the things the Nazi regime espoused. He was just using his status as a member of the Nazi Party to profit off of the war in World War II. He made connections with higher-up people who could give him stuff that they essentially confiscated from Jews to make businesses selling pots and pans and canteens and bullet casings and bandages and whatever to the German army in World War II. And he used and manipulated a bunch of Jews who had everything taken from them, who he knew that he could employ because he didn't legally have to pay them because Jews weren't allowed to have money at the time. So he just gave them surplus from the factory to sell on the black market. But he could pocket every bit of money from this massive corporation he was going to build. And slowly, like very slowly, but surely over time, due to the relationships he had to build with the Jews to pull this thing off, he began to not just care about the Jewish people, but he began to fall in love with the Jewish people. This is where it's going to get tricky. Hold on. I'm going to stare at the light like I'm going to sneeze. It's so I don't start crying. I'm an ugly crier. I can't talk while I cry. So he then proceeded for the next couple years until the middle of the war, roughly until the end of the war, to sell everything he ever owned in life, to then intentionally bankrupt his own business and then sell the German army faulty products so he could bribe officials, and he was literally buying Jews, men, women, and children, to come work in his factory and to keep them away from the horrors of the concentration camps and death camps. Some of his Jews were even sent to Auschwitz by mistake, and he went after them and he got them back. And by the time it was all said and done, right at the moment that he hit bankruptcy, the war ended. And because of his association with the Nazi Party, Oskar Schindler had to flee because he was being hunted down for crimes against humanity. And yet by the end of the war, giving up everything he ever had in life, saved roughly 1,200 people from the gas chambers, which in turn created a whole new generation of Jews. I want to show you all something. It's a clip. Steven Spielberg made a movie about Oskar Schindler called Schindler's List. If you haven't watched it, you should. It's very rated R. It's violent. There's nudity. It's not for the kids. But you should watch it at least once if you haven't. I'd like to show a clip because it should work. And this is Schindler facing his Jews right before he has to run. So, all this stuff being said, I think we're doing good stuff. I really do. I just don't want to be a church that when everything's all said and done and it's all over, we're not staring at an ocean of good that we've done, regretting what we could have done more. I'm talking to you, David, for response time. If the band wants to come up during this response time, essentially whatever you need to do with God, whether it's pray about that person that God keeps putting around you and you don't know what to do with it, whether it's because it's socially awkward or because, everybody's got to stand, okay? Because you're tired or because you accidentally got distracted doing genuinely good, amazing things. for you personally, for us as a body, for what it means to be a part of the bigger church here in the state. What can we do to be a people that doesn't forget to value everything God values? And that's other people. And I just kind of want to leave it off with some interesting words that Paul says in the beginning of Romans, saying, I'm speaking the truth in Christ. I'm not lying, and my conscience bears witness in the Holy Spirit that I have great sorrow and unceasing anguish in my heart. And I wish that I myself could be cursed and cut off from Christ for the sake of my brothers, for my kinsmen according to the flesh, the Israelites, the adoption, the glory and the covenants, the ones whom all of these things were made to. To them belong the patriarchs, and from their race, according to the flesh, came the Christ, who is God of all. Paul, the man who wrote most all of the church doctrine that we now consider sacred and holy scripture, said, if he knew that the rest of his Jewish brethren could actually understand who Jesus was, he'd be willing to suffer for them and take their place, separated from Christ. So I guess the question we got to wrestle with for the next while is, what are we willing to do for the people around us who don't know?